So it's fitting that Nancy ended her talk with a poem, because now we are looking forward to having Ben Wang, New York's own poet laureate, address us. Ben.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Joseph. And I thank the Metropolitan Art Museum for letting me come. I'm very honored, but I feel like I'm a piece of dessert, okay? After that, all the eloquent talks by Mike and Nancy, and I will try I shall. So 4 days into the Chinese New Year, first I would like to say 恭喜, Happy New Year to all of you, a very Happy New Year. And I would say how fitting, how appropriate it is that we are here stepping into the new year, welcoming the new year by looking back at some magnificent days in old China. I always remember what one of my favorite writers from England, Muriel Spark, what she had to say. She says, the glory of the past is the inspiration for the future. So I do have hope for Chinese art, for classical Chinese poetry, calligraphy, and Chinese painting. And I think the Metropolitan Museum of Art is doing all these things to endorse these things and to bring people here to look at them. And for that, personally, I shall be eternally grateful. Now, speaking of coincidence, this year marks the 300th birthday of Emperor Qianlong. He was born in 1711, and we have just stepped into 2011. And I'm surprised that Holland Cutter didn't even mention it. And I was looking for it, and I said, I'm going to make it my opening passage, just to show Ben Wang knows few more things than Holland Cutter. I adore him. So, Emperor Qianlong remains one of the most unusual leaders in the history of China. As Holland Cutter pointed out in the article that appeared today, in fact, he said, Emperor Qianlong is a man of contradiction. Indeed, he ruled with an iron fist and a tender heart. And the endorsement and the encouragement of the arts belongs with the part of the tender heart. And he himself, of course, he had some talent, and he was a poet, calligrapher, and painter. Whether or not he was a great one is in question, but there is this soft spot in his heart for these great things of art. And for that, the Chinese people loved him. During the time, a little bit before he became the emperor in 1735, in the southern part of China, there were numerous great painters, poets, and calligraphers. Quite often, three rolled into one. In southern China, there emerged a great number of these artists, and 8 of them featured most prominently in the history of Chinese art. And you must know, they are the famous, the 8 Eccentrics from the city of Yangzhou. Yangzhou in those days, actually in the long history of China, the city of Yangzhou, which is to the north of Shanghai. These days, I understand, it takes only 2 hours by train or car. So in those days, in the old days, since the Tang Dynasty until the 20th century, Yangzhou had always been the Chinese answer to the old province town. I'm talking about the province town when Eugene O'Neill, when Castle McCullers, when Tennessee Williams, when they gathered and they composed their great works. So all the men of letters and artists would gather in the city of Yangzhou. Now, these 8 eccentrics from Yangzhou, why are they called eccentrics? Because they, at the time, they were avant-garde artists. And their one belief is to break out from the tradition and to create a new school, an avant-garde school of painting, of poetry, and calligraphy. And arguably the greatest and the leader of the 8, by the name of Qianlong, and his dates are almost identical to Qianlong, Emperor Qianlong. You know, I truly believe in the German word zeitgeist, because somehow during one period of time there would be great artists or sometimes cruel politicians or statesmen would emerge as before the Second World War. But in this case, all these great artists, they emerge. And this man lived, and he was active during the height of the Qianlong rule. So their lives and their activities, their works, are quite inseparable from Emperor Qianlong. Now, I will not wait any longer because, as Nancy pointed out, I feel the restraint of time. So let's look at what this Qianlong did or what he could do. This is the first painting by Qianlong. Qianlong was born in 1687. He died in the year of 1764. And Qianlong was born 1711. So Qianlong is 24 years older than Qianlong. He died 35 years before Qianlong. And this painting, any of you, and I suspect all of you do, you're quite familiar with Chinese painting, Chinese art. So you can see that the composition alone of this painting is quite unusual in the sense this. You see the composition is quite unusual. Usually it's inside, in the middle. But here, this is diagonal, and which makes it very unusual. And if you feel the painting and these leaves and the blossoms and the roof of this gallery, and there is a person here, you have to look very carefully. The person is painted so lightly, as if to say, we human beings, we're born, we're dead. We're not even more important than a piece of grass or piece of stone. So human shape must be underpainted. So there is, if you look very carefully, you see a man looking out to the lotus pond. And I hope you can feel this acute sense of circular movement and roundness. It's funny that in the English language, the word round can mean complete. And when it's referring to voice, it can mean sonorous, a very pleasant, beautiful sound. So in Chinese art, anything related to beauty, to culture, in the Chinese culture, everything must be circular or round. For the Chinese belief that it's only within a perfect circle can there be a perfect union between the feminine and the masculine forces, yin and yang. So you see the leaves and the rooftop of the gallery and the blossoms and the different shades of green. And this man is looking. And actually, someone is talking. Someone is thinking. So maybe this man maybe an angel flying in midair, looking at this man, looking at the lotus pond. So in the Chinese culture, the Chinese love to put poetry, calligraphy, and painting, 3 on one painting, which is almost unthinkable. In an English garden, however beautiful it is, it's inconceivable to see all of a sudden a board on which is written, "A thing of beauty is a joy forever." But in China, wherever you go, especially to a garden, especially to a beautiful scenery, spot of good scenery, you would see couplets or characters carved on rocks. If there are no houses, you see Chinese characters. Because Chinese characters are man-made nature. There are stories. Everything is a picture. Every character has a story. Every picture has a pictographic story to tell. For that reason, calligraphy and classical poetry are held in the highest esteem in Chinese culture. Painting is only the supplementary thing. The reason being there's so much a painting cannot represent. The flowers might be talking, the leaves might be talking, the viewer, the man who is looking, is thinking, but a painter cannot paint out those thoughts, those words. And therein comes poetry and poetic line executed in fine calligraphy. This is why poetry, calligraphy, and painting must roll in one in order to give the viewers an all-rounded enjoyment, appreciation of this piece of art. So I often tell my friends and my students that poem on the Chinese painting, it's almost like the current day comic cartoon. Someone is talking. These are the words spoken by the leaves, by the blossoms, or by the man. So with that in mind, we must know what is being written here, what is being said. Obviously, it is something to reinforce the beauty of this painting. Now, we'll see. This poem is marked by a grand and exquisite musicality. The music is intoxicating. I go over the Chinese first. 荷花开了，迎堂悄悄。新娘早，必知蜻蜓多少。That ends the first stanza. I hope you heard the rhyming. And this starts the second stanza. 六六水窗通，扇底微风。记得那人同坐，献手拨莲蓬。In English, here. The lotus in flower now, the silver pond hushed, reinvigorating cool fills the dawn, with emerald winged dragonflies countless. By the water, the 6 and 6 open casements facing each other, faint breezes under the fan. Ah, the mind is filled with memory of the one with delicate hands peeling the lotus pod. This is the poem. So who is saying this? As I said, could be the angel flying in midair, looking at the lotus leaves and the lotus blossoms, and watching this man looking at the lotus pond. Or it could be the man looking at this, and this is a memory piece. And this is what I call romanticism, marked by sweet remembrance of golden halcyon days that are lost. But memory will carry the day. Love will remain and prevail. This is romanticism in Chinese poetry, calligraphy, and painting. And what's so amazing is that the line starts with lotus blossom are in flower, they bloom, but it fades quickly. And the end of the poem, the remembrance, the memory of a delicate, sweet one, sitting next to me, her delicate and fair hands, and the way her hands move, an elegant Chinese woman must move her hand to suggest the blossoming of a lotus or orchid. In the Chinese theater, it's the same thing. So you move this way, you do not do this. You do this to suggest blossom. So her delicate hand is peeling the lotus pod. Lotus may be dead, but the son, but the children of lotus will live. Golden halcyon days will pass, but love and memory will remain. And this is the first work by Qianlong. I think the central theme of this work is love. Now let's take a last look of this painting. I think with the understanding of the poem, I think the painting, the work, takes on new meaning, I hope. This is the second painting by Qianlong. Again, as Nancy so eloquently put it, which is quite true, that the Chinese, we love two blossoms, two flowers. Two flowers reign supreme in the mind of the Chinese, the orchids and the plum blossoms. So these are plum blossoms. As how it is painted by Qianlong, very unusual, very unconventional. We will see a conventional painting, execution of the painting of plum blossoms later. But we look at this one by Qianlong, the leader of the Eight Eccentrics from Yangzhou. Before, as I was introducing the poem, I left out one thing, which is, I think I have to use this now. Mine doesn't work. I did not mention his extraordinary calligraphy, which is called in Chinese, qi shu. Literal translation of qi shu would be lacquer writing or lacquer calligraphy. And what does that mean? It means every stroke is executed is written with very dense and very strong ink, with no dry touch. His calligraphy is one of the most unusual in the history of Chinese art. Every character suggests the plum blossoms. So Qianlong's favorite flower was plum blossoms. In fact, he loved the flowers so much, he gave himself a literary sobriquet, which is the heart of winter, Jin Dong Xin. So he is known as Qianlong. His given name means farming. He's a farmer. But he gave himself a literary sobriquet, that is Dong Xin, literally winter heart. What is the heart of winter? Plum blossoms. They bloom in the depth of winter. So his calligraphy suggests a small child. It has this guileless and childlike quality that the Chinese find enormously attractive and wonderful. And no one else in the long history of Chinese art would write similar calligraphic style as Qianlong's. So this is a plum blossom, a branch. Without having to tell you, it's so obvious, apparent, that there's so much moving on the painting, which creates this poignancy and liveliness and this. And as I mentioned, the circular movement here, down to every blossom, circular. And not to leave this space empty, there are a few. One blossom, flower in full bloom, and a small bud here. And on a Chinese painting, the artist would leave a lot of blank space, which is called 留白. In English, it can be called flying whiteness, meaning flowing whiteness. That is, for some reason, when you look at a painting like this, you do not feel, I do not feel, that this is just the color of paper. I feel as if there were something in the background, whereas there is nothing. Whereas it's inconceivable for a Western painting oil to have a space that is not painted. So here, there is, it's not a poem. It is a poetic, it's a poetic dedication in prose style. And in Chinese, in the Chinese language, I read very quickly. This is in prose style. He painted this painting to dedicate it to an old friend of his. And who is this old man? What is their relationship? What is their friendship to each other? Let's see. Everything, he cannot express those in the painting through the painting of the blossoms. So he needs these poetic lines to complete the show. In Chinese, 寄予庄老先生，别于6年，今相见于广陵客舍，往复夹询，先生又将还礼，写此梅花小册，以赠其行。一展观之，定不忘白头老夫在水边林下也。So, and the last part is the date, which is 1760. Translation in English. I remember that after having been apart for more than 6 years, the venerable Master Zhuang and I met again at the guest house in the city of Guangling, Yangzhou. For 10 days, we visited each other, but now the master is again leaving me and returning to his native town. So I have painted this album of plum blossoms as my parting gift for his journey home. When he opens and views it, may he not forget this white-haired old man here all alone by the river under the trees. By Qianlong, old man of 74, in the 9th lunar month in the year of 1760. So, So now let's look at this painting again. So he has dedicated this to his old friend who is gone. When will they see each other again? They're both old people. No one knows. Maybe never. But they'll remember each other when the friend sees this, definitely. So the branch of plum blossoms is indeed saying something, even though it's not saying something. It is saying something. What is saying? What is it doing? It is waving as if the branch were a hand to say, my friend, goodbye, goodbye. But remember me. Always bear me in your mind. Do not forget me. And you see this, the movement. The plum blossom, this branch, the flowers are talking to his old friend. The plum blossoms are voicing what's on the mind of this great artist. And this, I would say, is the magic of Qianlong. Now, I have to quickly get to the leading figure of this event, which is Emperor Qianlong. Now, while all the southern artists are doing their things, appreciating painting, appreciating the plum blossoms, and what is our emperor doing in the north, in the capital? Even though, as I mentioned before, he rules with an iron fist, but also with a tender heart. So in his tender heart, he is also appreciating a great piece of painting of plum blossoms by a Yuan master, one of the 4 greatest painters during the Yuan dynasty, whose name is Wu Zhen. And his literary sobriquet is the Taoist monk of the plum blossoms, 梅花道人. And Wu Zhen was from the 14th century, late 13th century to 14th century, late 13th century to 14th century, 1280 to 1354. It's obvious that when Emperor Qianlong saw this painting in his collection, he was just completely taken. He was so taken that he decided to put his own poem on the painting. Emperor Qianlong wrote more than 80,000 poems in his lifetime. More than 50,000 are still with us. And he insisted placing his own calligraphy and painting on the paintings by great masters in the past. And this is for 2 reasons. One is that he is an aficionado of these art forms, so he wants to express himself. 2, he wants to show all the Chinese people 2 things. One is, I love what your ancestors had left you as well, as much as you do. So do not keep thinking that I'm a northern barbarian. Not only do I love it, not only is there a soft spot in my heart for the great art created by your ancestors, but I can do it. I can write poems. I can execute my poems in fine calligraphy. And I can appreciate it. So even though I've come to your land to rule you, but I respect, and with that, the Chinese people's hearts were conquered, were taken. So he put down this is why Qianlong put down his name, his poems on so many paintings as no other emperor ever did in the long history of China. So here, characters, the poem in the largest characters, obviously, was by Emperor Qianlong. And then he had 4 great scholar, nevertheless, minions. His ministers, they are great scholars, nevertheless, his minions. They wrote 4 poems in their poetic echo to the style of the poem of the empress, which means all of these 5 poems are in the same style, which is pentasyllabic quatrain, 5 characters per line, 4 lines in total. And the last characters of the first line, second line, and fourth line must be exactly the same as what the creator, the emperor, has done. This is what I call a poetic echo. This is a special poetic literary genre in the Chinese culture. If I like you so much, you are a master. And if you ask me to write a poetic echo to a poem that you have written, it's a high compliment. So obviously, these 4 were his favorite scholars. And actually, this one was his teacher. And he served as his grand counselor. And this one was actually quite often his ghostwriter. He wrote his poems, and he executed the calligraphy. And this man's family name happens to be mine. It's also Wang. So let's see what they write. I will not go through all these four. We will look at this, and we'll look at this, and this. What the emperor had written. I go very quickly with the Chinese. 突无寒烧处晓风，广平铁石干元宫。刚从河谷扬回处，消息传来破垒红。English, with cold, bare tree tips braving the dawn wind, how the trunk resembles limestone and strength. From the valley of the grain, where springs returned, comes the news. Redness of the buds is breaking. Emperor Qianlong. And try to remember what he put down here, the word, the redness. And the second one by his grand counselor and his teacher. 孤称冰雪待春风，漫论他时鼎乃公。几点书花消息动，便应管岭上林红。Translation: Alone braving ice and snow, he awaits the spring wind. His feats rely none on help from any assistant. Now that a few buds are open, harbingers of good tidings, soon he'll lead all the redness in the imperial garden. By Liang Shizheng. And the third one, 千年铁干保双峰，生意能参造化工。方信此功真妩媚，胜他姹紫与嫣红。How many ice storms you, the 1,000-year-old trunk, have braved. It must be God's will that you are still so full of life and strength. Oh, I'll say that you, my Lord, are truly the loveliest. Yes, lovelier than all the alluring purple and red. Now, here is a red, the last line, and then red. The character red, a variation. There are many characters in the Chinese language for the color red. It can be hong, as in this poem, red. But it can also be zhu, which is more literary, poetic, and classical, which happens to be the last name of the emperor of the Ming dynasty, the House of Ming, meaning he, this plum blossom, you, my lord, Emperor Qianlong, you will conquer the house of Ming, the house of Zhu, of the red. So in the poem, the emperor is talking about how he will break the redness, meaning the dynasty established by a name whose last name is red or crimson. And the rest, all his ministers are saying the same thing. You will lead the red. And then you are lovelier than the rest, even though they are alluring red and purple, but you are the best. So superficially, everyone is singing the praise, is praising the blossoms, but actually, what are they talking about? The Qianlong is quite self-intoxicated and self-complacent in what he has achieved. So the history of China has taught us that in order to be a great leader, great king, you must be a great militarist, a great statesman, a great ruler. You know how to manage and govern. You know the art of governing. But if it's in your heart to have a little spot for poetry, for calligraphy, for painting, then you will make yourself even more dear to people who know you, but not the other way around. For a poet, someone who is just bon vivant, and someone who just loves life, la joie de vivre, for him to be a king or leader, it won't work. And so as represented by this Emperor Qianlong, we have learned quite a few lessons because of his multifarious talents and geniuses. We have learned quite a few things from him. And I'm sure he knows the theory, he knows the art of someone. You are a big macho man, but you have to bend down to smell the roses, to touch the heart of the Han people whom he is ruling. And taking the heart of the Han people, take the heart of the Han people, Emperor Qianlong did. On this note, I say goodbye to you. I hope to see you again, and thank you.